July the 20th, 2020, a bright, ambitious 18-year-old athlete on the verge of his senior year is found no longer alive under suspicious circumstances. His father, former WSMV news anchor Aaron Solomon, is the only witness. According to Aaron, Grant was retrieving baseball gear from his truck when the vehicle suddenly rolled forward, trapping him underneath. But his mother and sister don't believe this was an accident. They claim that Grant purposefully had his time on this earth ended, and that Father Aaron is responsible. According to Aaron Solomon's statement, the father claims he looked down at his phone, and when he glanced back up, he saw Grant's truck rolling into a ditch, with Grant trapped underneath. But several red flags immediately stood out. Aaron was the only witness to this. He claimed that 3 people were helping him at the scene, but first responders and employees never saw these people, and they were not mentioned in police reports. Also bizarrely, Aaron declined an autopsy before Grant's mother, Angie Solomon, even arrived at the hospital. Grant's injuries also did not match the reported accident. There was a blow to the back of the head, a blow to the jaw, a bruise on the upper thigh, and one more disturbing detail. One of Grant's baseball bats went missing that day, an item that has never been recovered. Things only get darker when we look back. Months before his demise, at Grace Christian Academy in Franklin, Tennessee, he asked for help from school staff by sharing his disturbing secret. His father had been getting physical with the entire family. As well as that, he said Aaron had been violating his sister, Gracie. He had witnessed Aaron attempting to throttle his mother with a blow-dryer cord. Things were not good. However, the school did nothing. No reports were made. No authorities were contacted. Nothing was done to protect Grant, Gracie, or Angie. Recently, younger sister Gracie broke her silence. She wrote and read a statement at 13, and she has recently reshared it too. She revealed that she is terrified of their father because she knows Aaron killed Grant, and Aaron had maltreated or violated both of them. Her words only reinforce what Grant had already tried to tell people before he met his end. Here is a short excerpt from Gracie. I am terrified of my dad because of everything he has done to my family. He has hurt me, my brother Grant, and my mom in ways that no one should experience. He controlled us, manipulated us, and used fear to keep us silent. Grant has always tried to protect me, but when he was finally old enough to speak out, he mysteriously passed away. I believe my father was responsible. Now I am speaking out for justice. My mom and I keep pushing forward, but I live in fear that he will try to take me away again. Gracie also mentions how her father insisted on being the one that would give her baths or be present when she showered. That makes his picture so dark. For 3 years, Grant's mother Angie has been fighting for answers. On June the 1st, 2023, she launched a petition to force the district attorney to open an investigation into Grant's death. In just days, over 300,000 people signed it. The people are demanding a real investigation, but Tennessee officials refuse to act. And you may ask why. Allegedly, it's because Aaron Solomon has direct ties to Tennessee Governor Bill Lee. In fact, they both attend the same megachurch, and Bill Lee's office has been actively blocking efforts to investigate Grant's death. Beyond the suspicious circumstances of what happened to Grant, Aaron Solomon's past only raises even more questions. He was allegedly involved in an escorting ring at WSMV Channel 4, which some believe is why he was fired after 15 years on air. He was known to have powerful connections in Tennessee's political and media circles. So, with his influence, is that why the case is being ignored? What do you think? A young man possibly paid the price for speaking out. But will Grant Solomon finally get the justice he deserves? This case is far from over, and it appears to still be shrouded in a dark world. Let me know if you want me to make a longer standalone documentary on this case. By the way, this is Dark Case. I appreciate you being here with me. Seriously, I do. Firstly, make sure you're a part of the Dark Case family by hitting subscribe now. Basically, we're just weird people and we hang out together here. So, yeah, I'm really trying to hit 250,000 subs right now, So if you want to help me with that, then thank you. I'd love to read your thoughts about any of these unsolved mysteries too. Talk to me, please. Come on. And I want to say a quick thank you to the Inner Circle members over on Patreon. If you join the Inner Circle, then you'll get access to the private Discord server, and I've got the app on my phone, so I'm down to share memes and talk about crisps or chips all day. And the link to join is down below. Anyway, thank you, and let's continue. Ingrid Kierkegaard was born on May 7th, 1964, in Maldegem, Belgium. She was the only child of a couple who owned and operated a bakery in their village. While she primarily lived with her parents, she frequently spent nights at her boyfriend's apartment in Knock-Heist, a small coastal village in West Flanders. Ingrid had established a successful career in real estate. She owned and managed her own agency, Agency Atlanta, which was located in Knock-Heist. Those who knew her described her as attractive and well-dressed, someone who was in a stable relationship and led a quiet life. On March 16, 1991, Ingrid made a brief stop at a clothing store owned by a friend. According to her friend, Ingrid seemed to be in good spirits. After leaving the shop, she bought a sandwich from a local bakery before heading to her boyfriend's apartment for lunch. She arrived at the apartment building at 1 p.m. Normally, she would have gone home to eat lunch with her parents, but because she had a business meeting with a client in the area, she decided to stay close by. Just minutes after Ingrid entered the building, a resident took the elevator to the 6th floor. When the elevator doors opened, the resident froze in shock. Ingrid's lifeless body lay on the stairwell. She was between the 6th and 7th floors, covered in red. In a panic, the resident took the elevator back down to the ground floor and then rushed outside in a state of distress. Eventually, she ran to a phone booth where, kind of strangely, she contacted her husband, who then thankfully instructed her to call the police. Authorities arrived at an horrific scene. Ingrid had been jabbed with a sharp implement over 62 times. The red that had leaked from her covered the surrounding area. She had defensive wounds on her hands and arms. This suggested that she had fought desperately against her attacker, and spatter patterns indicated that the attack had begun on the stairwell. It became obvious too that the perpetrator had also injured himself in the process. He left behind a trail of crimson red laced with his DNA. In fact, a deep red handprint was found on the glass door that led into the apartment building, and a 170-meter-long trail of drips extended onto the sidewalk outside, too. Investigators believe the attacker heard the elevator doors open. They panicked and ran upstairs to the 8th floor to avoid being seen. Then when the coast was clear, they ran outside, where the trail of drips stopped abruptly, suggesting that the perpetrator had entered a vehicle and then fled before law enforcement could arrive. Initially, police were optimistic about the investigation. The apartment complex was in a busy area, and on that day there had been a long queue to an ATM nearby. In fact, the line had yet to clear when authorities arrived, meaning potential eyewitnesses were still present. However, when police questioned everyone from that line, only one person reported seeing anything suspicious. That was a single red stain on the sidewalk. Investigators then turned their attention to the area where the trail of drips ended, and their prior theory that the person had entered a vehicle seemed to be confirmed, as witnesses recalled seeing a small red car, and they remembered it because it had been poorly parked on the sidewalk near the scene. And when one of those witnesses was placed under hypnosis, they could identify the vehicle as a Honda Civic. This was the first major breakthrough. This led police to investigate all registered red Honda Civics in West Flanders, but the search produced no viable suspects. Also notable was that nothing had been stolen from Ingrid. There were no signs of forced entry to the apartment, and she had not been violated or SA'd. Some investigators considered the possibility of fraud as a motive. At the time, there were real estate scams in the area involving the sale of fictitious land. This was something that Ingrid was strongly against. Could someone have wanted to silence her before she exposed their illegal dealings? However, the sheer brutality of the scene led police to believe that Ingrid had personally known the killer. Naturally, their first suspect was Ingrid's boyfriend, but his alibi was solid. He had remained inside his apartment the entire time, which was confirmed by multiple neighbours. He was devastated upon learning what had happened to Ingrid just outside his front door. So, with the most obvious suspect eliminated from the investigation, police had to dig deeper into Ingrid's final weeks. On February the 14th, 1991, Ingrid received an anonymous Valentine's card. It wasn't from her boyfriend, but she appeared to recognize the sender. Upon reading it, Ingrid angrily tore it to shreds, an action that was witnessed by her mother. 2 weeks later, on March the 2nd, she found a love letter placed in the trunk of her car. Then on March the 9th, a bouquet of purple carnations was delivered to her real estate office. This detail, although it seems small, stood out. Years later, Ingrid's mother recalled, Ingrid hated carnations and didn't think purple was a nice colour. She thought you'd only give that to dead people. And the unsettling incidents didn't just stop there. On March the 13th, while staying at her boyfriend's apartment, someone rang the doorbell. When Ingrid's boyfriend answered through the intercom, there was no reply. Whoever it was walked away without a word. Despite all of these incidents, though, there were no real solid leads. None of Ingrid's friends or family knew of a stalker, and no one saw the person who rang the doorbell on that day. So although interesting, the trail went cold. With few options left, investigators turned to DNA evidence. They extracted genetic material from the red fluids left behind at the crime scene, hoping for a match in police databases. By the end of March 1991, the results came back. There were no matches. The DNA also did not belong to Ingrid's boyfriend, so this further cleared his name. Weeks later, police received an anonymous letter written in block letters. It read, I killed Ingrid Kierkegaard out of love, pour la passion. I knew her very well. This letter raised a crucial question. Was the killer a native French speaker? After all, Ingrid was murdered in Flanders, and that is a Dutch-speaking region. Her friends, family, and the investigating officers all spoke Dutch, yet the letter was partially written in French. Could the killer have been from Wallonia, the French-speaking half of Belgium? Hoping for a breakthrough, police released the letter to the public, asking anyone who recognized the handwriting to come forward. They also analysed DNA from the saliva on the stamp, but no match was found. The case eventually went cold. Years later, a woman placed flowers on Ingrid's grave in secret. The same thing happened in 1993, then again in 1996. Each time, the bouquet contained 2 roses and a purple carnation, the same flower that Ingrid was known to dislike. So perhaps this was a malicious act, rather than something done out of respect. Despite multiple leads, thousands of interviews, and advances in DNA testing, the identity of Ingrid's killer remains unknown. In 2024, using phenotyping technology, police reconstructed a profile of the suspect. Police indicated that the murderer was a Western European man, approximately 40 years old at the time, meaning he would be in his 70s today. I'll let you know if there's an update on this case. Thomas Clancy was born on April 16, 1923 in Split Rock, New York. He was the 6th of 14 children in his family. In November 1942, during World War II, he enlisted in the Army Air Corps and trained as a pilot. Over the course of his military service, he completed 40 bombing missions and was awarded both the Distinguished Flying Cross and the Purple Heart for his bravery. In October 1943, Thomas married Jane Carson, and together they had 12 children, 8 daughters and 4 sons. Tragically, their firstborn son only spent 1 day on this earth before passing on. After leaving active duty in 1950, Thomas transitioned into civilian life as a salesman, but he did remain in the Air Force Reserves. His natural talent for sales led him to a career in insurance, and by 1966, he relocated his family from Syracuse, New York, down to Texas, where he purchased the salvage center of Dallas. He managed that business until 1981, when he sold it on to his sons and then shifted his focus back to insurance, purchasing the Reba Clancy Insurance Agency. His business partner, Jack Reba, later described him as a real straight arrow in business. During this time, after 35 years of marriage, Thomas and Jane divorced in 1979. He later remarried a woman named Janeth Dunson on October 21, 1981 in Hawaii, and the couple settled down in Carrollton, Texas. In November 1983, one of Thomas's daughters became gravely ill. She was admitted to the Medical City Hospital in Dallas. On Friday, November the 11th, Thomas visited the hospital with other family members and then left when visiting hours ended. However, he returned later that night at around 1 a.m., a fact that was confirmed by hospital staff who saw him there, and that was the last time he was ever seen alive. By Saturday morning, his daughter Barbara became concerned when she was unable to reach him. Thomas did not return to the hospital, and calls to his home now went unanswered. By Monday, November the 14th, Barbara and Thomas's son, Thomas Jr., or Tommy, both contacted the Carrollton Police Department to report their father missing. Barbara and Thomas's office assistant later made a shocking claim. They alleged that on the night of November the 11th, Thomas met his assistant at Clancy's, a bar located across the street from a hotel where his car would later be found. According to their account, Thomas's wife confronted them in the parking lot. This led to an argument and accusations of infidelity. However, this confrontation ended with all three going their separate ways. Later that night, Thomas returned to the hospital, making this confrontation one of, but not the last known event before his disappearance. On Tuesday, November the 15th, Thomas began searching for his father near his salvage business. At 6 p.m., he spotted his father's 1982 Cadillac, which was parked outside the Lowe's Anatoly Hotel at 2201 Stemmons Freeway, Dallas. After retrieving a spare key from the Clancy home, Tommy and his friend John returned to the vehicle. John, who had experience with hunting, opened the trunk. Inside, they found their father's body. He was lying on a bed of newspapers, his hands folded over his chest. He was dressed in a t-shirt, shorts, and socks. However, his wallet, Rolex watch, gold ID bracelet, and his ring were missing. The car itself showed signs of unusual activity. The tyres were covered in mud, suggesting it had been driven through wet or clay-like terrain. At 9:30 p.m., the police were notified. Authorities determined that someone had pulled the trigger whilst aimed at the back of Thomas's head with a medium-caliber weapon. The bullet had likely exited his body and was never found. Police believed that he had been ended somewhere else, and that his body had been placed in the car afterwards. There were also possible foreign fibres on his hands and back, though what these indicated remained unclear. The newspaper under his body dated back to October and November, with the most recent being from November the 11th, which was the same night that he was last seen at the hospital. Additionally, the soil on the tyres appeared to have come from an area with wet, sandy clay, possibly near the Trinity River levees, which were located within a mile of where his car was found. At the time the missing persons report was filed, police noted family members were accusing each other of potential involvement. The official report even listed son, wife, possible suspects. But despite these factors, the investigation still quickly stalled. In February 1984, the Clancy family offered a $10,000 reward for any information leading to the arrest of those responsible. Notices were published in the Dallas Morning News, as well as other newspapers, but no new leads came in. Over time, the case just faded from public attention. Authorities cited a lack of physical evidence as a major obstacle in the case. In 2002, the Vidocq Society, a group of retired investigators specializing in cold cases, offered to review this case, but the Dallas Police Department declined, and their reasoning, opening these files to the Vidocq Society, would have meant disclosing confidential details that they still hoped would lead to an arrest. However, Dallas police did allow the Texas Rangers Unsolved Crime Investigation team to examine the case. Exactly what came of their attempts remains unclear, but they obviously didn't solve it. In 2022, nearly 40 years later, Dallas police made a public appeal on social media asking for any information that could help to solve this historic murder. To this day, Thomas Clancy's family continues to offer a $10,000 reward for any information. However, their goals have somewhat shifted. They are no longer seeking an arrest. Now they simply want answers. On December the 26th, 1983, hunters stumbled upon a child's skull in the woods. It was situated behind a rest stop along Interstate 95 in Northampton County, North Carolina. It was roughly 1 mile from the Virginia border. When authorities arrived, additional scattered bones were found throughout the area. Evidence suggested animal activity, as marks from scavenging were observed on multiple of the longer bones. However, some crucial parts of the skeleton were missing. The torso and at least one hand were never recovered. The condition of the remains indicated that someone had likely attempted to conceal the body. However, due to the state of degradation, the cause of this person's demise could not be determined. Examinations confirmed that the remains belonged to a girl, and that she was probably between 4 and 7 years old. Her ancestry was determined to be predominantly black, with some white genealogy. Due to the poor condition of her remains, forensic experts could not estimate her weight or height, nor could they determine her hair and eye color. No clothing, no jewelry, or any personal items were found at the scene. There was notable injury found on her jawbone, specifically areas on the left mid-jaw and the back right of the jaw. The jaw showed evidence of the bone healing, meaning the injuries had healed before she met her end. Additionally, there were also signs of her nose healing while still alive too. It's unknown whether these were caused by maltreatment, or it could have been just some kind of accident. Another medical discovery pointed to chronic health issues. She had suffered from severe long-term ear infections, also known as chronic otitis media. This condition, caused by bacterial or viral infections, had progressed to the point of causing visible markings on the skull. Despite this, there was one encouraging clue. She had 2 dental fillings in her molars. This meant that, at some point, she had received dental care, proving that she had some level of medical attention, and it meant that she would have been known by someone outside of her household. Forensic specialists conducted isotope analysis on her bones, and this provided insight into her movements throughout her short life. The results suggested that she and possibly her mother had relocated frequently across the eastern United States. Before her birth, her mother may have lived in the Midwest or the northeastern US. During the first year of her life, she likely resided in the northern part of the southeast US. In the final years of her life, she may have been living farther south, possibly in central or southern Florida or central Texas. This information revealed that she did not grow up in one place, making it difficult for authorities to determine where she went missing from, meaning accessing things like medical or dental records would have been very tough. It also made it much harder to determine who may have been responsible for all of this. Early on in the investigation, some speculated that she might have been connected to the St. Louis Jane Doe case, a well-known case from 1983. However, this theory was later dismissed, likely due to the discovery of additional bones belonging to the Northampton County Jane Doe, meaning that the facts just didn't match up. This girl still didn't have a name. Her case also bears striking similarities to that of Amor Wiggins, also known as the Opelika Jane Doe. Amor was a similar girl whose remains were found in a wooded area. Like the Northampton Jane Doe, she had evidence of prior bone fractures, and tragically, Amor had a terrible home life, and she had never even been reported missing. While there is no evidence to directly link the 2 cases, it does raise important questions. Could the Northampton Jane Doe have suffered a similar fate to Amor? One of the most notable forensic findings was the presence of fractures on the skull. The placement of the fractures were unusual. They appeared on both sides of the jaw, which raised the questions: what kind of event could have caused these specific injuries? Additionally, her chronic ear infections were significant. Whilst ear infections are common in children, cases this severe are often associated with underlying medical conditions, such as immune system deficiencies. Could she have been immunocompromised? If so, was she receiving medical care, or was she simply neglected and ignored? And maybe this condition was how she actually met her end. Given the circumstances of her discovery, it is highly likely that whoever was caring for her never even reported her missing. In many similar Doe cases, the lack of a missing persons report often suggests foul play. The condition of her remains makes it impossible to say for certain whether she was ended intentionally or this happened due to neglect or an illness. But one thing seems clear: her body was deliberately disposed of in this location. Whoever was responsible for her left her in the woods near an interstate, treating her as if she were merely disposable rather than a human being. Despite the decades that have passed, there is still hope for answers. Her dental records and, more importantly, her DNA are now on file. If the necessary resources become available, there is a strong chance that the Northampton County Jane Doe could finally be identified after more than 40 years. And when that happens, at least one person should be prepared to face their justice. James Valdez was 47 years old when he vanished without a trace from Boonville, Logan County, Arkansas. His disappearance remains a mystery, and one that his family and investigators strongly believe involves foul play. James had recently married his wife, Anna Valdez, just 1 month before he went missing. The couple had dated for a year prior to their marriage. At the time, they were living in Anna's mother's house because the mother had broken her back in a fall and required care. So living in that home were Anna's mother, Anna's brother, and 2 of Anna's daughters. James also had a daughter from a previous relationship who lived in Ozark, Arkansas. Anna's brother had a checkered past. He was facing charges of kidnapping after allegedly tying a man's hands and attempting to throw him off a bridge. So the dynamics in that home may have been a little odd. James was a recovering addict, and he was believed to have been 1 year sober at the time of his disappearance. But while James had successfully completed rehab, Anna was still an active substance user. James also suffered from diabetes, but he managed this with oral medication. Shortly before he vanished, his blood sugar levels had been dangerously high, and Anna had been urging him to see a doctor. When his blood sugar was off, she said James would become very agitated and cranky. 3 years before his disappearance, he'd experienced a diabetic episode whilst driving, during which his vision went black. Paramedics later discovered that his blood sugar levels had spiked to near coma levels. This prompted him to lose weight and to take better care of his health. James also took blood pressure medication. His sister, Shawn Claiborne, described him as a loving, happy, family-oriented man who was full of laughter and joy. On June 9th, 2021, James and Anna had planned to spend a day together. However, this didn't happen because she was called into work on her day off. James didn't want her to go, and so the two got into an argument in front of Anna's family. Despite this argument, Anna still left for work. James then turned up to her job, where it seems like an argument continued. Anna reportedly told him, "Do what you want." James then returned home, took $600 from Anna's mother, grabbed some clothes, and then drove to Ozark in Anna's 2010 Chevy Equinox. 3 days later, on June the 12th, his sister Shawn saw him for the last time when he joined his family for dinner in Ozark. During that meal, he told his family that he planned to return to Boonville soon. He also hinted that there was more to the argument with Anna than what he had previously shared with them. But what that was, we will never know. On June the 19th, the Chevy Equinox was found abandoned, situated about 10 miles southeast of Boonville. It was in the remote area of Dry Creek Road, Sugar Grove. The car was discovered by the husband of Anna's boss, who was an old friend of James. He had helpfully been keeping an eye out for any signs of the man. What really caught his attention was a disturbing message scrawled across the back window in the dirt. It read, "Help me, he is near." Concerned, the friend contacted authorities immediately. When investigators arrived, they made several strange discoveries. The keys to the car were missing, all the doors were locked, a section of the engine was damaged, and the driver's seat was pulled all the way forwards and had a tear along the seam. Also strange was the back seat was folded down, and that the battery and other components had been disconnected. Outside of the vehicle, police also found an insurance card belonging to James, receipts possibly from his wallet, some loose change possibly belonging to James, personal items that may have been removed from the car, and one particularly troubling detail was that a Glock, which Anna had bought for James, was now nowhere to be found. Initially, investigators suspected the "help me" message might have been written by James himself, knowing he was in real trouble. However, on June 21st, police learned that the writing had just been a prank. 4 young men had written those words on June 17th, 2 days before the car was found. At that time, they had seen the car still running, but when they came back later, the car had stopped running, and that's when they decided to scribble the message as a joke. Despite this revelation, it still remained unclear exactly when and why James's car was abandoned there, and why it had been tampered with. James's cell phone was a pay-as-you-go device with no active service plan. This meant he could only use it whilst connected to Wi-Fi. His phone last pinged about 3 miles away from the car, in a location that would suggest it was underwater. Police brought in divers to search the body of water, but no trace of James was ever found. One bizarre twist occurred 3 weeks after James vanished. When police visited the Valdez household, Anna was already living with a new boyfriend. Something about this whole situation just didn't seem right. Given the circumstances surrounding this disappearance, there are 2 main theories. The first being foul play, with many, including the police and James's family, believing that someone has harmed him. It doesn't help that Anna moved on so quickly, suggesting that she may have known that her husband wasn't coming back. Anna's brother also had a violent history. Was he possibly involved? James's car was tampered with, so who did that and why? It was believed his phone had been thrown in the water, so was it thrown there by someone covering their tracks? Despite all these red flags and possible clues, there was no real clear motive. James didn't own anything valuable, and while his marriage to Anna was rocky, there was no known history of things getting physical between them. But could there have been an unknown conflict behind closed doors? The second theory was a medical emergency. Given James's history of diabetes, it's possible he suffered a severe episode once again. For instance, if his blood sugar level spiked, it's possible that he pulled over after feeling weak or disorientated, that he locked the car behind him and wandered away in confusion. But if this were the case, who tampered with his vehicle? Although of course it could have been James himself whilst confused. It's also suspicious that James's body has never been found. His sister Sean has been relentlessly advocating for answers, ensuring that James's case stays in the public eye. There is currently a $6,000 reward for information leading to either James's safe return or the arrest and conviction of anyone responsible for his disappearance. When he went missing, James was 47 years old, but now would be in his early 50s. He was 5'10" tall and weighed between 200 and 220 pounds. As you can see from the pictures, he's a white male with brown hair and brown eyes. At the time, he had goatee facial hair. He also had a distinctive Sierra tattoo on his left arm. He was last seen wearing black checkered shorts. Any information would be greatly appreciated by the family. On May 6, 2004, a party was held in an apartment in the Fana district of Bergen, Norway. Among the attendees was 31-year-old Trina Fransen. She was a Swedish woman who had been living in Norway. Trina arrived at the gathering with her boyfriend and a friend of his. The party continued into the early morning hours of May 7th, at which point Trina decided to leave. She left alone and was then never seen again. Despite her sudden disappearance, it wasn't until May 13th that she was officially reported missing. Surprisingly, the report did not come from her friends or family, but from her social worker. Trina was unemployed and had struggled with substance misuse for 13 years. She relied on social welfare and disability benefits to survive. When her social worker failed to hear from her, they found it unusual enough to alert the police. Police first focused their search on Irvston, following a tip from the boyfriend of one of Trina's friends. He claimed to have seen her in the area on May 9th. Another witness also came forward. A woman in Irvston reported that on the night of May 10th, someone rang her doorbell and asked to borrow a phone. She said the woman's voice sounded like Trina, but the homeowner never saw her face. She was being too cautious to open the door that late at night. At first, police saw no clear signs of foul play. Given Trina's history of substance use, authorities assumed she had left voluntarily, perhaps on a bender. However, concerning details soon emerged. Her phone activity stopped on May 11th. her disability benefits were transferred to her account on May the 26th, but that money remained untouched. Her bank cards had no new recorded activity. Despite this though, the search efforts still remained limited. According to police, the lack of information made it difficult to know where to even begin looking. For Trina's family, obviously this was a failure of law enforcement. They believed the police weren't doing enough, and that they were simply dismissing Trina as just another addict. To them, her silence was alarming, and at this point they already firmly believed that she had been murdered. One chilling claim surfaced from her family. According to them, in the years before she disappeared, Trina had been terrified of an unnamed man who had repeatedly threatened her life. However, police said there was no documentation of these threats, and so they were unable to verify the claims. Months would pass before authorities changed their approach. On August 19, 2004, Trina's case was officially reclassified as a murder investigation. But by then, precious time had already been lost. In the months since her disappearance, police had only questioned 27 witnesses. Their poor handling of the case led to complaints from the Hordaland State Attorney and a formal misconduct report to Norway's Police Affairs Bureau. Although no criminal charges were brought against them, the police did receive harsh criticism for their apparent negligence. Unfortunately, even with this case now being treated as homicide, the investigation still went nowhere. No new witnesses came forwards. Previously interviewed witnesses had no additional information. Crucial mobile phone data had now likely been auto-deleted. The owner of the apartment where Trina had last been seen had now also strangely passed away, so they were struggling for answers, and even door-to-door inquiries in her neighbourhood yielded nothing. On August 31, 2004, police cordoned off Trina's apartment and brought in cadaver dogs from Sweden. They searched both her home and the surrounding area, but by that time, her apartment had been cleared out. The furniture had all been sold on or dumped. Most of her belongings had been thrown away, and her carpet had been removed. Investigators now had very little hope of finding evidence, and indeed, they didn't. Further searches took place in the nearby woods on October 10th, but again, no new evidence was found. By January 2005, the case was once again shelved as unsolved. On January 11th, 2007, the case was briefly reopened. Police searched septic tanks and opened multiple manhole covers, hoping to recover remains or at least some crucial evidence. But they didn't. On January 23rd, divers searched the bottom of a local river, only to find an old rubber boot that had no connection to Trina. With so little to go on, her family raised a 250,000 krona reward. But unfortunately, this money only led to a wave of hoaxes and false tips. On February 6, 2007, police arrested Trina's boyfriend for her murder, as well as a 46-year-old friend of his for allegedly helping dispose of her body. The evidence, a reported argument between Trina and her boyfriend that happened in a taxi on the night of the party. The boyfriend's friend refused to cooperate with the police, which wasn't surprising. The social group he moved in were distrustful of law enforcement, but ultimately the case against them would fall apart anyway. By July 21, 2008, all charges were dropped due to lack of evidence. Later, police admitted that they had suffered from tunnel vision, ignoring over 25 witnesses who saw Trina alive after the time that they had alleged her murder took place. To make matters worse, on the night that she was supposedly ended, her boyfriend and the friend had an alibi. Honestly, kind of a funny one. They couldn't have done it because they were stealing a car at the time. In December 2018, Trina's case was featured in a 3-episode documentary series. One theory suggested that she passed on from an overdose, and the person she was with, in a panic, buried her in a pre-existing grave at Ufston Cemetery. Police found this theory compelling enough to investigate. On March 11, 2019, investigators conducted a full sweep of the cemetery using ground-penetrating radar and 3D sonar technology. Between March the 15th and 16th, 5 graves were exhumed, However, no evidence was found. On May the 31st, they dug up another grave based on a witness statement, but once again, the search turned up nothing. Then, between June the 3rd and 4th, an additional 8 graves were exhumed, bringing the total to an unlucky 13. And despite their best efforts, police found no trace of Trina. In October of 2022, a Norwegian cold case unit reopened the case. They conducted a new round of interviews and considered further searches. By November 2, 2023, authorities once again called for public assistance, but no new leads emerged. In April 2018, the small town of Lisbon, located in Claiborne Parish, Louisiana, was shaken by the disappearance of 4-year-old Rondreas Jr. Phillips. Rondreas vanished from the front yard of his family's home, something which sparked a large-scale search. And to this day, the mystery continues. Jr., with his black hair, brown eyes and cheeky smile, was last seen at 11:30 a.m. on April 8, 2018. At the time of his disappearance, he was wearing a white shirt, blue jeans, and black and yellow rubber boots. According to reports, he had been outside with his mother's then-boyfriend, Nicholas Gilbert, while his mother, Sheila Phillips, was inside the home. Junior's biological father was incarcerated at the time. The official account states that Junior wandered off while outside, and within moments he was nowhere to be found. As soon as authorities were notified, hundreds of volunteers joined law enforcement in searching the heavily wooded area that surrounded the family's mobile home, which was located 3 miles southeast of Lisbon. Authorities even drained a nearby pond in hopes of finding clues or finding Rondreas, but nothing significant was recovered. The case quickly gained the attention of state and federal law enforcement, with agencies such as the FBI and Louisiana State Police becoming actively involved in the investigation. A Level 2 Endangered/Missing Child advisory was issued, signaling urgency in locating Junior. However, the case did not meet the full criteria for an Amber Alert. For an Amber Alert to be activated, 3 conditions must be met. It must be a confirmed abduction, there must be belief that the child is in immediate danger, and there must be enough descriptive information to aid in the child's recovery. So, since there was no confirmation of an abduction, authorities could not issue that alert. Despite this, extensive search efforts were still launched. Investigators conducted grid searches on foot, and teams used helicopters and drones to scan the surrounding area. Days turned into weeks, yet no new leads emerged. Eventually, the large-scale public search was called off, and authorities then only focused on targeted areas of interest. As time passed, the case gained national attention. It was featured on crime-focused shows like In Pursuit with John Walsh, as well as in People magazine's Faces of the Missing. Unfortunately, while these efforts did generate public interest, the tips that came in were leads that investigators had already pursued. In 2020, 2 years after Junior's disappearance, the Claiborne Parish Sheriff's Office released an age-progressed image depicting what Rondreas may look like at 7 years old. Despite the passage of time, the FBI's Shreveport Resident Agency Office continues to actively work on the case. They are urging anyone with information to come forward. The investigation remains open, with law enforcement following any potential leads. Authorities do remain hopeful that new information will emerge and that they will deliver much-needed answers about what happened to Junior and where he might be today. Matthew John Ferris was 19 years old the first time he went missing. On July 25, 1990, he left his home in Des Moines, Iowa, telling his family that he was taking a day off work to help a friend move house. However, later that day, his father discovered a note that Matthew had left behind. In the letter, Matthew apologized for the pain that his disappearance might cause the family. This unsettling message was suggesting that he had no intention of returning. But a week later, Matthew did unexpectedly return home. But when he returned to Iowa, he seemed deeply shaken. Though it's kind of unclear what frightened him, something had clearly left him disturbed. Following this strange episode, Matthew underwent 6 months of mental health treatment. However, details about his treatment, including whether he was on medication at the time of his second disappearance, all remains unclear. During this period, he was also enrolled at Iowa State University. Less than a year later, in early 1991, Matthew vanished again. On the night of March the 7th, he went to a movie theatre, but he never returned home. At the time, he was 20 years old. His family immediately sensed that something was very wrong. They described his behaviour leading up to this event as unusual, noting that he had seemed uncharacteristically happy, maybe even manic, in the weeks before he disappeared. Unlike his first disappearance, this time, Matthew never came back. His family believes that he may have voluntarily travelled to Custer State Park in South Dakota. He had been expressing a strong interest in Native American folklore, which may have drawn him to that area. When he disappeared, he was driving a silver 1982 Pontiac, although the exact model seems to have been lost. But after March the 7th, 1991, there were no new confirmed sightings of him or his vehicle. Given the timing of his disappearances, one of the most plausible explanations is that Matthew may have been experiencing the onset of mental illness. It's common for serious psychiatric conditions, things such as bipolar disorder or schizophrenia, although I'm obviously not diagnosing anyone here, to start appearing in young adulthood. His father had, after all, described his behaviour as manic, which could possibly indicate bipolar disorder. If Matthew was entering a manic phase, it might explain his sudden urge to leave home, travel, or escape his reality. So, one theory is that his elevated mood before disappearing was not mania, but was rather a sense of relief after making a plan to end his own time on this earth. This is something that can be common when someone is in this mental state. Another factor to consider is that if Matthew did have bipolar disorder, but he was only prescribed antidepressants without a mood stabilizer or antipsychotic, he could have in fact been at an increased risk of becoming more and more ill. The Doe Network does say that Matthew was treated for depression prior to disappearing. This could have contributed to his erratic behavior before he vanished. Unfortunately, without any new leads or confirmed sightings, it's impossible to know exactly what happened to Matthew after that night. While it is possible that he started a new life under a different identity or is living as a transient, the lack of contact with his family suggests a more tragic outcome. But until more evidence comes to light, it is seeming more and more likely that Matthew is no longer alive. At the time he left his home, Matthew John Ferris was 20 years old, being born in 1971, a white male. He had brown hair, blue eyes. He was 5'10", weighing about 140 pounds, and normally went by simply Matt. If he is still alive today, he would be 54 years old. Matthew's story is a haunting one. Was he indeed running from something? Did he encounter something the first time he vanished? Or was he simply running from himself? Was he experiencing a mental health crisis that led him to leave everything behind? Or was he a victim of something more sinister? The case continues to puzzle both authorities and his family. Matt's niece has this to say about the situation. My father and grandfather were able to locate Matt's car and belongings in South Dakota shortly after he went missing, but Matt was never seen again. My grandparents have always held on to the hope that Matt is somewhere living his best life. They spent pretty much their life savings on a private investigator soon after his disappearance, but nothing substantial ever came from it. My sister and I don't have much information. I think my grandparents and dad had no other choice than to become somewhat comfortable with the unknown and the lack of closure. But given all the advancements in technology and DNA, I would really like to explore the disappearance of my Uncle Matt and hopefully get some answers. In 1971, two brothers, Colin and Leslie Robson, were playing in their back garden in Hexham, Northumberland, UK. And then they stumbled upon something strange. There were two small round stone heads buried beneath the soil. The heads were about the size of a tennis ball, and they were roughly carved. One of them appeared to be male and the other female. They had exaggerated facial features with wide eyes. They had a strong brow and a primitive design. Obviously excited by their discovery, the boys brought the heads inside and placed them on a shelf. But that's when things started getting strange. That night, their mother, Mrs. Robson, woke up to the sound of objects being thrown across the room. When she turned on the light, she saw that one of the heads had mysteriously moved on its own, and in the days that followed, the disturbances only worsened. Doors now slammed shut by themselves. Small objects vanished and then reappeared in strange places. Members of the family reported feeling watched, especially when they were near the heads. The boy's mother now began waking up to the feeling of an invisible presence watching over her, and enough was enough. They decided to get rid of the heads, and they handed them over to their neighbour, Ellen Dodd. But if they thought this would put an end to the whole thing, they were wrong, and things continued to escalate. One night, Ellen's daughter screamed in terror as she saw a massive, shadowy figure in her bedroom. When Ellen rushed in, she saw a creature that looked half human, half wolf, and it was just standing in the doorway. The 7-foot-tall beast slowly turned, and then it walked out of the house. But when Ellen followed it outside, it had vanished into thin air. Other nearby witnesses too later reported seeing a large wolf-like creature roaming the area, and the creature matched Ellen's description exactly. It wasn't just the Robsons and the Dodds that were affected. As the heads were passed between different researchers, everyone who handled them reportedly had eerie experiences. Some of them had unexplained nightmares and sleep paralysis. Some had sudden feelings of dread and despair, and there was poltergeist-like activity wherever the heads were stored. Some researchers believe the Hexham heads were thousands of years old and possibly linked to ancient Celtic rituals. Hexham was once a centre for pagan and druid practices, and the heads may have been part of a burial or sacrificial rite. Some suggest that the werewolf-like creature seen by multiple witnesses was in fact a guardian spirit awakened when their heads were unearthed by the boys. So when they disturbed the heads, they could have unleashed a supernatural force, one that had been buried for centuries. Despite the compelling folklore and general spookiness of the whole thing, no concrete evidence has proven the heads were authentic Celtic artifacts. In 1974, a local man named Des Craigie came forward, claiming that he had made the heads himself as a child in the 1950s. Craigie said that he sculpted them out of concrete, not ancient stone, and that he left them in his family's garden, suggesting that the Robson boys simply dug them up a few years later. However, some experts who examined the heads believed Craigie's newly made versions did not match the original ones. And if he was telling the truth, how do we explain the bizarre events surrounding these heads? Skeptics believe the heads were nothing more than a psychological phenomenon. As the legend grew, people expected to experience paranormal events, and it's led to hallucinations and misinterpretations. Some researchers suggest the unease and fear caused by the heads could have triggered real physical reactions, things like headaches, nightmares, and sleep paralysis. Strangely, after years and years of being passed from researcher to researcher, the Hexham heads mysteriously disappeared in the 90s. Nobody knows where they are today. Some believe the heads were stolen, destroyed, or deliberately hidden to stop the paranormal activity. Others speculate that the heads were taken by a private collector, someone who wanted to keep them for themselves, perhaps to study them in secret. To this day, paranormal investigators still search for the heads as if they are some mystical relic. They believe they could hold the key to one of England's most bizarre mysteries. If someone offered you the Hexham heads, would you take them and keep them in your house? I'd love to hear your thoughts in general about this bizarre mystery. There is little publicly known about Martin Dickoff's personal background. That is, beyond the fact that he was born in either 1979 or 1980. He spent approximately 25 years living in Alphen aan den Rijn, a town in the Netherlands. His profession was in tiling, specializing in small, high-quality projects. And in 2017, he took the steps of launching his own tiling business. It's worth mentioning that this venture seemed to be financially stable and there was no reported debts. Friends and family described him as someone who was always willing to help others, and that never found himself in trouble. On January the 23rd, 2024, Martin decided to take a short trip. He left the Netherlands and drove to Ostend, Belgium, a well-known coastal city. That evening at 11:15 p.m, he checked into the Andromeda Hotel, a luxury accommodation in the area. After settling in, he headed to Casino Curacao, which is also in Ostend. Surveillance footage from the casino at 12:30 a.m. on January the 24th captured him putting on his coat and exiting the building. His behavior on CCTV suggested he may be feeling some level of unease. He appeared restless, spending more time on his phone than engaging with the slot machines. What was he so engrossed by? What happened next remains a little unclear. No nearby security cameras captured his movements directly after leaving the casino. However, at some point he did return to the Andromeda Hotel. Then at 4 a.m, CCTV footage from the hotel's underground car park recorded his black Volkswagen Transporter van driving out. However, while he physically left the hotel, he never formally checked out, so perhaps he was planning on coming back. The last confirmed sighting of Martin was at 4:52 a.m. on January the 24th at a gas station in Drongen, Belgium. There he was recorded on CCTV filling up his van's fuel tank and then purchasing a coffee. He was alone, and his behaviour appeared normal. There was nothing outwardly suspicious about his actions before he then drove away. On January the 25th, after one of Martin's clients reported that he hadn't shown up for an appointment, his family in the Netherlands then contacted the police to report him missing. This behaviour just didn't sound right. Since his disappearance crossed borders, Dutch and Belgian authorities launched a joint investigation. Authorities had that final sighting of Martin on CCTV, but they were also able to track his movements using cell phone data and his vehicle's onboard system. At 4:09 a.m, he departed Ostend and drove to Antwerp, later following a route that would have brought him to Rotterdam, Netherlands. Along the way, he stopped briefly for snacks in Drongen before continuing on his drive. As he approached Antwerp, he veered north, turning onto the R4 highway towards Ghent and its port. Then at 5:16 near Vondelgem, his phone was suddenly switched off. Despite this, police were able to trace the van's route by using CCTV footage as well as eyewitness reports. His vehicle was last seen driving towards the Dutch border near Zelzat. But just before crossing into the Netherlands, he abruptly turned around and headed back into Belgium. After this, all tracking data stopped. His van was never detected again. With no indication that he made it back to the Netherlands, Belgian authorities now took the lead in the investigation. It wouldn't be until February the 26th that a significant development would occur. Police in Alta, Belgium, a town 45 kilometers from Ostend, discovered Martin's black Volkswagen Transporter in a parking lot near the E40 highway. The parking lot belonged to a Fastned charging station, and this was an odd location because Martin's van was not electric. The van had actually been noticed by local authorities earlier on, but at the time they had no reason to suspect that anything was wrong. An officer had even issued it a parking ticket, which later helped to establish that the vehicle had been parked there since 6:05 a.m. on January the 24th. This was just minutes after Martin's phone was switched off. Investigators found it strange that Martin's van was left in an area he had no known connection to. The car park was also close to Alta's weekly market, so police questioned vendors who were setting up shop that morning, hoping that someone might have seen something. Unfortunately though, no useful sightings were reported. Authorities also visited local hotels to check if Martin had checked in, or maybe if he'd just been seen by staff, but no one recognised him. Additionally, drivers who had used the charging station that morning were interviewed, yet none of them recalled seeing Martin either. Inside his van, there were no traces of Martin himself. His wallet, passport, keys and iPhone were missing, yet his clothes were found neatly folded inside a suitcase. The interior of the vehicle was exceptionally clean, and there were no immediate signs of foul play. Investigators then appealed to the public for dashcam footage from the area in the hopes of gaining new information on the man's final movements. But frustratingly, this led to no new breakthroughs. With no concrete evidence of what happened to Martin, police have three leading theories. Martin did this to himself and made sure his body would never be found. Or he was murdered, possibly due to a dispute related to gambling or maybe road rage. Or that he vanished on purpose and is living a new life with a new identity. Despite an extensive investigation, authorities do not have enough evidence to support one theory over the other. Now, as time continues to pass since his disappearance, police remain baffled, saying, "That's a mystery to us." March 30th, 1986. A quiet stretch of farmland in Marbury, Alabama. A new property owner was clearing out an old storm cellar where he made a gruesome discovery. Buried beneath the dirt lay the skeletal remains of a woman. She had been hidden away for years, her body left to the darkness. Next to her, 3 bullets and a spent shell casing, a silent testament to murder. Who was she, and who wanted her this way? The woman had been buried in a storm cellar of an abandoned farmhouse. Investigators determined that she had been there for 5 to 6 years, meaning she likely met her end before 1983. And she wasn't just left there, someone had pulled the trigger 3 times, and the presence of the projectiles and shell casing suggested the act had been carried out there. That part of the case seemed quite obvious, but the big question was, who was she? There was no missing persons report that matched her description, but one clue stood out about the woman: her teeth. The victim was a white female, estimated to be between 35 and 50 years old. She stood between 5'2" and 5'6", and she probably weighed between 110 and 150 pounds. Her hair was brown, slightly curly, and cut short. Her dental work was extensive. She had a top partial plate with 7 artificial teeth, and her bottom 4 front teeth were missing. Did she normally wear a lower denture plate? That could be evidence, and it could be somewhere waiting to be found. Something else which stood out about the woman was her clothing. She wore a mesh halter top decorated with rhinestones. It suggested she may have been someone who enjoyed the nightlife. Maybe she was a dancer, a performer, or someone working in bars and clubs. It's also a possibility that she could be an escort. Whoever she was well taken care of until this. Her life wasn't just ended, she was buried and forgotten on purpose. Investigators believed her murder had some connection to the property. The fact she was hidden in a storm cellar on a farm, instead of being dumped somewhere remote, suggested that the killer may have owned or had access to the land. But for some reason, this information proved unfruitful. The shell casing found at the scene means that the attack was probably carried out at close range, and it probably happened face to face. Was the woman lured there? Was she brought there against her will? Currently, we don't know, but someone wanted her gone. For nearly 40 years now, she has remained unidentified. The woman has no name, no missing persons report, no family to claim her. Her DNA is not in a database, and obviously they were not able to take fingerprints. This meant police had basically nothing to go on. And without a match in dental records, the woman remains a Jane Doe buried in silence. Someone somewhere knows who she was, and someone somewhere knows who put her in that cellar. Will her story ever be solved, or will she remain one of Alabama's forgotten women? For now, she is known only as the 1562 UFAL Jane Doe. Now, I've left this one till last because I admit it is a little wild, but let's work through it together with an open mind. This is the Alaska Triangle. Imagine stepping into the Alaskan wilderness, but never coming back. Deep within one of the most remote places on Earth, a mysterious region known as the Alaska Triangle has earned a reputation for strange vanishings, missing planes, and generally eerie encounters. Since 1988, over 16,000 people have vanished there, and many of them were simply never seen again. Planes vanishing without wreckage, hikers being found miles away from where they should be, and even entire search teams having disappeared trying to find the missing. Is it just Alaska's extreme environment? Or is something more sinister at play? Let's dive into the triangle and the bizarre theories behind what may be happening. One of the most famous vanishings in the Alaska Triangle happened in 1972 when a small aircraft that was carrying US House Majority Leader Hale Boggs Congressman Nick Begich, an aide, the pilot and the plane mysteriously disappeared. The largest search and rescue mission in US history was launched. It covered 325,000 square miles. But despite weeks of searching, no wreckage, no bodies, or in fact any clues at all were ever found. And as if that isn't strange enough, this wasn't the only incident. In 1950, a military aircraft with 44 people on board just vanished without a trace, too. No debris, no distress signals, nothing. And it's not just planes that are going missing. Hikers, hunters, and even entire groups of tourists have all vanished inside the triangle. Some bodies have been found, but they have been found in impossible locations, far from where they should have been, with many others never found at all. With so many of these bizarre disappearances, people have started to ask, is there something darker and more mysterious at play? Here are the leading theories, and here is where you have to be a little open-minded. Well, maybe a lot open-minded. The Alaska Triangle has long been linked to UFO activity. Some believe this vast, isolated land is home to an alien base, and it's hidden deep within the mountains or maybe underground. One of the most chilling UFO encounters happened in 1986, when Japan Airlines Flight 1628 was flying over the area. The pilot, Captain Kenju Terauchi, spotted 3 massive glowing objects. They appeared to be larger than his own plane, and they followed him for nearly an hour. Air traffic control confirmed unidentified objects on the radar, but before they could properly investigate, the UFOs vanished without a trace. And many theorists believe that it is aliens that are responsible for the missing people, that they are abducting them before they can be found. Others think that these vanishings are part of a government alien experiment, one hidden deep within Alaska's remote landscape. Others believe the Alaska Triangle is home to a powerful energy vortex, similar to theories about the Bermuda Triangle. These vortexes are thought to be natural electromagnetic hotspots, and that they're so powerful that they can distort time and space. And pilots have reported strange occurrences, things like compasses spinning wildly, GPS systems failing, and their aircraft suddenly losing control. Even native Alaskan folklore speaks of shadow beings, as well as other strange forces in the region. Some believe these stories hint at portals or maybe interdimensional rifts hidden within the triangle. One wild theory suggests that people who disappeared in the area are actually being transported to another dimension, but they are unable or unwilling to return. While mainstream science is obviously skeptical, the region's high levels of electromagnetic energy do remain unexplained. Could these powerful forces be causing the malfunctions in aircraft, as well as disorientating hikers, or even pulling people into another reality? It's worth mentioning too that Alaska is home to one of the most controversial government facilities in the world. HAARP, otherwise known as High Frequency Active Auroral Research Program, is located in Gakona, Alaska. Officially, HAARP is a research facility studying the ionosphere, but many believe it's actually a top-secret government project with a hidden purpose. Theorists claim that HAARP is actually experimenting with mind control, with weather manipulation, and advanced energy weapons. It's also believed by some that HAARP could generate earthquakes, could cause planes to crash, or indeed could make people disappear. Adding to the mystery, many disappearances in the Alaska Triangle happen within HAARP's general vicinity. Could the government be hiding something in the remote wilderness of Alaska? And if so, is there a link to this mystery? According to Tlingit and Inuit legends, the Alaskan wilderness is haunted by the Kushtaka, a supernatural shapeshifter that mimics human voices to lure victims into the woods. The Kushtaka is described as a cross between a man and an otter that is capable of changing its form and trapping people's souls. For centuries, native Alaskans have feared the Kushtaka, believing it preys on travelers, lost hikers, and those who wander too deep into the wilderness. Some believe these creatures are responsible for the missing people, taking them to places that no one will ever find them. Others even suggest that Bigfoot or other unknown cryptids could be responsible for some of the disappearances. While skeptics obviously dismiss all of this as folklore, as myths, many Alaskans insist that something is out there, watching and waiting. Whether it's UFOs, magnetic anomalies, government secrets, or supernatural predators, one thing is certain: the Alaska Triangle is one of the most mysterious places on Earth. Obviously, this mystery remains unsolved, but could all this just be a massive coincidence? What do you think is happening here? Let me know down in the comments. Be careful out there, and I'll see you soon.